Welcome to our deep dive into Holding Up the Universe by Jennifer Niven. We're going beyond just reading the book. We're really looking closely at the reviews and the different discussions surrounding it. So are you ready to kind of unpack all of this?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating, especially given the controversy that surrounded the book when that synopsis first came out.
Right. The main character, Libby Strout, she is labeled America's fattest teen, which is, wow, a label no one should ever have to bear. And, she was even rescued from her own house because of her weight. The synopsis focuses on her return to high school after she loses weight. And that whole premise just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Yeah, body image is such a sensitive topic, and the way Libby's story was initially presented, I think, made people worry about how it would handle such a complex issue. Would it be done sensitively?
Yeah.
It seems like Niven was aiming to explore themes like bullying and self-acceptance and finding your identity, but that initial framing just did not land well with a lot of readers.
It's interesting, right? Because we've got these reviews and people are coming at this from such different places. Some people found Libby incredibly empowering, and then others felt like, oh, she's just annoying, she's whiny. And then you bring in Jack, the other main character. He has a prosopagnosia, so face blindness. That just adds a whole other layer of complexity to the story.
And both Libby and Jack, in their own ways, represent individuals who don't fit into what society expects, and they face unique challenges because of it. The question is, does the novel effectively and accurately, portray those challenges and their journey to try to find their place in the world?
Let's start with Libby. So she was labeled America's fattest teen.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can imagine the implications that probably has on her for her entire life. Even after losing weight, she comes back to high school and she faces just immense prejudice. And then there's this incident. It's this cruel high school game called the Fat Girl Rodeo. And that's actually how she and Jack meet.
Oh, wow. That incident really highlights the nature of bullying, especially for people who don't fit those, narrow standards of beauty that society has. It's a stark reminder, actually, of how normalized cruelty can be towards people who are overweight. And it's often just disguised as like a joke. But think about it. The long-term effects psychologically of those kinds of experiences, you could end up with social anxiety, depression. You could even develop eating disorders.
And it's disturbing, too, because Jack is actually involved in the beginning, even if it is reluctantly. It makes you question his character, like at least at the start. What role is he playing in keeping this kind of behavior going?
It's a good point. It does speak to the pressure I think a lot of teenagers feel to fit in, even if it means sort of compromising their own values.
We also learned that Jack has been hiding his prosopagnosia from everyone his whole life. He can't even recognize his own family.
That detail has sparked a lot of debate among people who have read the book. Could his family really be oblivious to his struggles for that long? Especially given that prosopagnosia is neurological, right? It affects the brain's ability to process faces. Some reviewers they found that part of the story implausible. They question, did the author do her research? How is she portraying this condition?
It does seem kind of unrealistic, right? And the fact that he hides it even from his family speaks to like a deep fear of judgment, isolation.
Absolutely. It adds a layer of complexity to his character, for sure. He relies on other cues like voice, clothing, mannerisms to try and identify people, but it's a constant struggle to maintain that facade.
That's fascinating. So he's living with this secret. He's constantly afraid of being exposed.
Yeah.
It's like he's leading this double life.
Exactly. Imagine the emotional toll that takes. To not be able to recognize faces, it can lead to social anxiety and it makes forming relationships really difficult. And you just feel isolated.
And then Libby becomes the only person who knows about Jack's condition. So how does that change things between them?
That's where they really connect. They both feel like outsiders. Libby, because of her weight and the bullying, and Jack, because of this thing that he can't tell anyone about.
It really makes their bond unique. Like they see each other's vulnerabilities. They see the things that they hide from the rest of the world. There's a shared understanding and a sense of empathy, and it's born out of their own personal experiences.
It's that shared understanding that is, the foundation of their whole relationship. They find comfort in each other. They can be themselves, their true selves, without fear of being judged. But the question is, does the novel really convince readers that their connection is genuine? And is it sustainable, given all of the pressures they face from society and their own personal challenges?
And what about how their romance is portrayed? That seems to be a big point of contention for reviewers. Some of them just thought those romantic declarations were a bit much.
Well, let's look at some of those lines that got people talking.
Okay, so one reviewer even quoted this line. My heart goes hopscotching out of the room and down the hall and out the door into the street. And then there's this one. And now my heart is nowhere on earth to be found. I can see it as it bypasses the moon and the stars and goes blasting into another galaxy.
I mean, those lines definitely lean into a more heightened style of expressing romantic feelings, almost theatrical. Some people might find that endearing. Others might think it's cheesy or over the top, especially if you prefer a more grounded and realistic portrayal of relationships. It really shows how subjective reading can be. Our own preferences really shape how we respond to different writing styles.
Okay, so let's get back to Libby. There's this scene where she makes this decision to wear a purple bikini, and she hands out flyers that say, "You are wanted." What's your take on that?
That's a really pivotal moment for her. It's a bold act of defiance against, all of those societal norms that tell us what's beautiful and what's acceptable. By choosing to wear a bikini, especially after being labeled America's fattest teen, she's reclaiming her body. She's challenging those narrow definitions of beauty that have been forced on her.
She's basically saying, this is me, take it or leave it. She's defining herself, not letting other people tell her what she's worth.
Exactly. And those flyers with the message, "You are wanted," they add another layer to the scene. She's not only embracing her own body, but she's extending that message of acceptance and self-love to everyone.
But then there's the question, is this really an act of empowerment? Or is it reinforcing the idea that her weight is like her defining characteristic? Some reviewers felt that despite that message of self-acceptance, the story just kept coming back to Libby's weight.
It's a valid concern. It's difficult to portray characters that challenge these norms without accidentally reinforcing the very stereotypes you're trying to break free from.
It's a tough balance, right? You want to acknowledge the character's struggles, but you also don't want to make it seem like their whole identity is about those struggles.
It's a fine line to walk, and a lot of authors struggle with this, especially if they are writing about characters that are marginalized.
And what do you think of Libby's quote where she says, "Here's the worst thing of it. You know how far I've come, and I know how far I've come, but everyone else just sees me for how large I am or where I was years ago, not who I am now."
I think that quote speaks to how powerful labels can be and how hard it is to escape the judgments from other people, even when you've made a lot of progress. It highlights how different self-perception and how others perceive us can be. And that gap can be incredibly frustrating and isolating.
It also really emphasizes the impact of societal expectations, how they can define us long after we've moved beyond those limitations.
It's a reminder that true self-acceptance isn't just about how we see ourselves. It's also about how we deal with the judgments and perceptions from everyone else.
And that takes us to Jack and his experience with prosopagnosia. What can we learn from his story?
Well, Jack's journey kind of contrasts with Libby's. He's facing a different kind of invisibility, one that's rooted in a condition that affects his ability to connect with others on this very fundamental level. While Libby confronts those expectations head-on, Jack struggles with this hidden condition. And it adds another layer of complexity to everything. He faces a different kind of invisibility, and it's rooted in this condition that makes it hard for him to connect with other people.
And you mentioned that prosopagnosia affects the brain's ability to process faces. Can you kind of break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, so prosopagnosia is a neurological condition. It's not a problem with vision, actually. It's a dysfunction in the part of the brain that's responsible for recognizing faces. So imagine looking at a face and not being able to tell if it's your friend or a stranger or even a family member.
Wow.
It's like looking at this jumbled puzzle that you can't solve.
That sounds incredibly disorienting. I can only imagine how that would lead to social anxiety and make it really hard to build relationships.
Oh, absolutely. And the severity of prosopagnosia, it varies a lot. Some people might struggle to recognize a few faces, while others can't recognize any faces at all, not even their own reflection.
So how do people with prosopagnosia cope?
They develop these coping mechanisms, a lot like Jack does in the book. They might rely on other cues like voice, hairstyle, clothing, the way someone walks even, to identify people. Some people will even memorize specific details about someone's appearance, like a birthmark or a certain piece of jewelry. It's constant observation and deduction.
I bet that takes a lot of mental energy and effort to have to navigate the world that way.
Yeah, it definitely does. It can be really exhausting mentally and emotionally, and it often leads to social awkwardness and misunderstandings, which can be really frustrating.
So let's talk about how Jack's prosopagnosia is actually portrayed in the book. Do you think it's accurate?
It's tough to say for sure without having lived experience, right? But some reviewers who actually have prosopagnosia have expressed mixed feelings about how it's shown in fiction in general. Some feel like it's often really oversimplified or that it's just used as like a plot device,
Yeah.
without exploring the full impact the condition has on people's lives.
So while the book might raise awareness about prosopagnosia, it doesn't really capture the nuanced realities of what it's like to live with it.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to remember representations in media, they really do shape public perception and understanding. That's why accurate and sensitive portrayals are so important.
Let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the romance between Libby and Jack. Some readers thought it wasn't realistic, especially considering Jack's prosopagnosia.
I can see why some people would have trouble accepting their relationship. It does raise questions about whether someone who struggles with facial recognition could really develop deep feelings for someone that they may not even be able to visually recognize.
And then you have all of that societal pressure about body image, which adds another layer of complexity to their relationship.
Right, absolutely. And the story does acknowledge those pressures, especially for Libby. She faces constant judgment and scrutiny because of her weight. So the question is, does the novel convince you that their love transcends those pressures, or is it just relying on that idea that love conquers all?
So it sounds like readers have to decide for themselves if they believe in the authenticity of their relationship.
Exactly, and how they interpret it will depend on their own experiences with love and relationships and societal expectations.
What about the argument that Libby's weight ends up being her defining characteristic, even though there's this message of self-acceptance throughout the whole book?
That's a really good point, and it gets to the heart of the challenges of representing characters that don't fit in. Is the story celebrating Libby's individuality, or is it accidentally reinforcing those stereotypes it's trying to break down?
It's a question worth thinking about, especially in young adult fiction. Representations can really impact how young readers see themselves and other people.
You're right. It's important for young people to see themselves reflected in stories, but those reflections need to be authentic, and they need to have nuance.
You mentioned earlier that Holding Up the Universe is an hashtag Own Voices story. What does that mean, and how does it relate to this particular book?
So, hashtag Own Voices means that the author shares a marginalized identity with the characters they're writing. In this case, Jennifer Niven has talked about her own experiences with obesity. So that brings a personal perspective to Libby's story.
So she's using her own life to help shape the character's journey and her struggles.
Exactly. And hashtag Own Voices stories can offer valuable insights and authentic representations. But it's important to remember that they're still only one perspective within a diverse community. You should always try to seek out multiple voices and perspectives so you get a fuller understanding.
That's a good point. We should be careful about thinking that one story can represent the experiences of a whole group.
Absolutely. And that's at the heart of what we're doing here in the deep dive. We want to encourage you to think critically and to question your assumptions and to go beyond the surface of the material.
It's about having a thoughtful conversation about the book's themes and how those themes resonate with us personally.
Yes. And one of the themes that really resonated with a lot of readers is this idea of societal expectations and pressures, especially for young people. They're trying to figure out body image and self-acceptance.
We see that in Libby's experiences, the bullying, her journey towards self-love, even Jack's choice to hide his prosopagnosia because he's afraid of what people will think.
Yeah, the book really does a good job of showing how those pressures can affect our behavior and how we see ourselves and even our relationships. It makes you think about how we might contribute to those pressures without even realizing it.
Like, how often do we judge people based on how they look or what we think their flaws are? And how do those judgments contribute to a culture that says you have to fit in instead of be yourself?
Those are big questions. And the book doesn't give us the answers, but it does make us examine our own biases and think about how we can be a part of creating a world that's more inclusive and accepting.
We need to be more aware of the messages we are sending, not just our words, but how we act and how that might be affecting the people around us, especially young people, because they are dealing with their own insecurities and self-doubt.
I think the book's message about self-acceptance really gets to people because it speaks to a very human desire to be seen and accepted for who we truly are, even with our flaws.
It's about saying, I'm an individual, and challenging those norms that try to tell us who we should be.
And it's about having the courage to be authentic, even if it feels a little scary.
That's something everyone can relate to. It doesn't matter how old you are or what you've been through.
Absolutely. And that's the power of stories like Holding Up the Universe. It creates space for empathy and understanding and reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles.
Now I want to talk about the ending. What did you think?
Well, like a lot of things in this book, the ending got mixed reactions. Some people were satisfied, others thought it was a little too neat and tidy.
That's a pretty common criticism of YA fiction, I think. That tendency to have resolutions that aren't realistic.
But we have to think about who the book is for. Young adults, especially those dealing with the same challenges as the characters, they might find comfort and hope in an ending that's positive.
So it could be seen as a hopeful message. Like even when things are tough, you can still find happiness and achieve your goals.
Right, and sometimes that's exactly what we need, especially when it feels like the world is so overwhelming and uncertain.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a question. Does the ending, with all of its focus on resolution and happiness, undermine the book's more nuanced exploration of these really complicated issues? Or does it offer a message of hope and possibility that people need?
That's a really good question to think about, and I would love to hear what you think. What resonates with you? What parts of the story made you question things or see things differently?
We're back for the last part of our deep dive into holding up the universe. We've covered a lot of ground. The controversy, those complex characters, that ending that left some people scratching their heads. What really sticks out to you as we kind of wrap things up?
Well, one thing that I keep thinking about is how holding up the universe really makes us talk about some tough stuff like body image and bullying and mental health.
Yeah, it shows how powerful young adult fiction can be. It can tackle these complex issues in a way that younger readers can relate to, which can lead to some important conversations.
And you can't forget about all the controversy surrounding the book either. Some people might see controversy as a bad thing, but I think it actually shows that the book is pushing boundaries. It's making people think critically about these issues.
Controversy definitely gets people talking and debating, and it can make people confront their own biases. It might be uncomfortable, but sometimes that's how we learn and grow.
One of the most debated parts of the book is how Libby's weight is shown, even with that message of self-acceptance running through the whole story. It makes you wonder, is the story really empowering Libby and celebrating her as an individual? Or is it kind of reinforcing the same stereotypes it's trying to challenge?
It's a really delicate balance,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about sensitive topics like body image. And I think as readers, we need to think about our own interpretations and biases when we're looking at these characters.
I agree. It's not about saying one interpretation is right and another is wrong. It's about being open to different perspectives and having thoughtful conversations and respecting how other people connect with the story.
We also talked about Jack's prosopagnosia and how the book handled that. It did raise awareness, but some reviewers wondered if it was accurate and if it went deep enough. Do you think the book could have done more to really explore what it's like to live with prosopagnosia?
I think it could have. How does Jack really experience the world? What's it like emotionally and socially to not be able to recognize people's faces? The book touches on that, but it could have explored those things more deeply.
It's a good reminder that while fiction can be really powerful for raising awareness about important stuff, we have to make sure it's accurate and that we're not spreading myths or stereotypes.
Right. And it's always good to look for different voices and perspectives, not just one story.
Speaking of diverse voices, the fact that this is an #OwnVoices story adds another layer to the conversation. Knowing that Jennifer Niven has actually experienced obesity, does that change how you see how Libby's struggles are portrayed?
That's something to think about. On the one hand, the author's experience can make the story feel more real, more authentic. But then again, we have to remember that even in #OwnVoices story, it's just one perspective in a much bigger community.
It's easy to assume that one story speaks for a whole group, but we should be careful about that.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to engage with lots of different voices and perspectives.
Okay, let's get back to that main message that seemed to connect with so many readers. The importance of self-acceptance, finding out who you are and not letting labels define you. What are your final thoughts on how the book deals with this?
That message of self-acceptance, it's really powerful, especially for young adults who are figuring out who they are and dealing with all that pressure from society. It encourages them to be themselves and challenge the rules that try to put them in a box and to find their place in the world.
That message really goes beyond the book. It reminds us that true happiness comes from accepting and loving ourselves, not trying to be what other people want us to be.
And it's about finding the strength to be who you are, even when the world is telling you to fit in.
That's something we can all relate to, no matter who we are or what we've gone through.
For sure. And I think that's what makes stories like Holding Up the Universe so impactful. They create space for empathy and understanding, and they remind us that we're not alone in what we're going through.
So as we finish up our deep dive into holding up the universe, we'll leave you with this. What does it really mean to hold up the universe? Does it mean defying gravity, breaking free from all those rules and really going for it? Or is it about being strong and dealing with all the tough stuff life throws at us and being there for other people?
I think that's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves. And that's what's so cool about it. These stories stick with us. They make us think and question things and find our own meaning.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep talking about these things. And most importantly, keep reading.